And like I said, I didn't want to cover the entire path in leaves. I only wanted a few scattered here and there along the side of the path, just to give the path a bit more definition. It can be easy to get carried away with, particularly when you're working in view and you're working with things like these leaves. You don't want to go nuts. By all means, if that's the look you're going for, hey, have at it. But if you want realism, don't go nuts. Less is more, remember. That holds true for anything in design. Less is always more. So try and constrain yourselves. I remember when I first started using Vue, it was tempting to throw down, 10,000 trees and all that type of thing, which you can do. It just doesn't tend to look right though. And also vary up the, if you say you're making a forest in Vue and you're populating up a mountainside with trees, don't just load up one type of tree. Always load up at least 3. Don't go to like 10, but 3 to 4 different types of trees is always good to give you a more natural looking environment. And that gets back to what I was talking about the other day with the colours of these bushes. I chose bushes that purposefully have different colours of green, and that'll help to make the scene look more natural and to differentiate the different types of trees, bushes itself. So the same thing holds true for trees. If you're creating a forest environment, always try to go for like 3 or 4 different types of trees, and preferably with slightly different coloured leaves, so not all the same colour green. Just to give you that realism in your renders. That's the whole reason you're using Vue. You're using it mainly, I'm assuming, to create a realistic looking render. You can create cartoon type sketch type images as well, because in Vue they've added this sketch functionality that I don't use. Macs have done the same thing with their graphite viewports and stuff. Again, I don't use those. I'm sure some people find a use for it, but I haven't yet. So if I'm in a 3D program, I want to render a 3D image. I don't want to make my image look like I've drawn it in pencil. Like I said, I'm sure some people use it and find it useful, but I haven't, and I don't. So that's looking okay. Like I said, I can see here that we've got some definition happening here on the edge of our path with some leaves that have bunched up into the corners here and here, and just a bit through there. Again, all of these are going to come into a lot sharper focus when we start doing a high quality render. This is just a really low quality preview render for us to get an idea of whether our placement is correct or not. And you're going to find too that even once we've got our environment finished, when I start working in the background here, it's really going to dramatically affect the look of the image. And you'll see what I mean when I put a background in. Like I said, you could add mountains here in the background and populate it with trees to make a forested scene that way. I'm probably going to end up using an image. Number one, because it's going to make the final render much quicker, because Vue won't have all of that in the background to worry about. Number two, because it's going to actually create a more realistic image, because it's actually a photograph I'm going to use. I've narrowed it down to 2 photos, I think. And it'll just... But we can do that because we're rendering out a very small area of landscape. If you were rendering out a really large scene with mountains and things, you probably couldn't get away with using an image. And in those cases, it will take longer for you to do a render. But because we're working on... We're mainly concerned with our model here, so we're working pulled in pretty tightly to the actual model itself. We're not seeing huge parts of the landscape. We can probably get away with an image. Again though, I'll show you what I mean by that once we've set up the rest of the environment. But you can see here now that the image is lightened up. We have our leaves here scattered along the side of the path. Some of them are in the grass, just here and there. I didn't go nuts. I didn't paint the entire side of the path here with leaves. I didn't paint the inside of the path with leaves because, again, the wind will have blown it into to the sides of the path and into the grass. And it just, again, helps us define the pathway, add a bit more realism to the pathway, and it draws our eye back into the leaves here, which are actually on the model. Now, you'll see in my viewport up here, I only painted the leaves here on these steps. By all means, you could paint leaves up here on the tiled area if you're ever going to move your camera where you're going to render to see the top of the terrace here. Painting leaves up here would look good as well. I'm not going to do it because even when I do a close-up camera view, I'm not really going to be seeing the top of the garden terrace. If when I create my second cameras, because we're going to be creating two beauty shots, this wide shot and then a close-up shot of the model. If when I create the second camera, we can see some of the tile on the top, then I'll paint some leaves up there as well. But I won't do that until it comes time to actually need it. Because remember, every ecosystem object, plant, leaf, blade of grass, anything you start adding is going to start slowing your render time down more and more. So the more objects you have in your scene, the slower your renders are going to become. Which is why a lot of people, like I said, when they first try the program out, tend to throw down the first thing people will do is put down a mountainside. They'll load up a tree and they'll populate their mountainside with trees to 10 million trees. They'll probably load up a preset atmosphere here, and then they'll do a render and they'll think to themselves, why is my render taking days? That's usually the reason, because you've used too many objects in your scene. You've used a default atmosphere, which really, they aren't optimized for speed. They're the defaults that come with Vue. They're not really, they may look good, but they're not optimized to speed up your render. A lot of them are left over from older versions of Vue, so they're not really tailored to the new versions anyway. And you're always going to get better results by tinkering with the atmosphere yourself. It's not hard, it's just there's a lot of sliders to play with, that's all. But you'll get faster renders and better renders if you try and play with the sliders yourself and not load in one of their preset atmospheres. So my advice to you guys, if you find that you've downloaded the program, you threw in a mountain, you populated your mountain with some trees, and you're finding your renders are taking a very long time, it's usually because there's too many plants in the scene. Not too many that the program can't handle. It can handle anything you throw at it, but like I said, the more objects you have in your scene, the more plants you have in your scene, the slower the render is going to become. And again, that's one of the reasons why I like to use images in the background, because that will speed up our render. And when we start putting things in the background like a mountainside with trees on it, that is going to start slowing your render down. Because remember, Vue is an atmospheric rendering engine. It has to take into account all of those trees, no matter how far away they are, when it starts to render out your image. So the more objects it stands to reason you have in your scene, the more trees, plants, grass, flowers, the longer it's going to take for the program to do the render. Now, Vue does have what they call dynamic population. Let me just remove. Before I talk about dynamic population, let's see what we've done with our leaves along the path. This was our first render, and this is the second one now that we've spread the leaves out. So if I just flip between the two, you can and you concentrate on the front of the image here along the path. You can see the difference just by adding some scattered leaves makes to realism and adding a bit more definition to that pathway. It's subtle, but it really does help to sell the image itself. Okay, I'm going to remove that old one there. Now, let me see. I'm going to select something just to show you what. I'm not going to actually use it, but if I select my main terrain and open up my material, Vue has an option here called dynamic population. If you tick that and then go populate, Vue is only going to paint, in this case, that grass where our camera is looking. So if our camera is here and we're only looking at that part of the model, Vue is only going to paint grass in that little section there and that little section there. It's not going to paint any grass around the outside that the camera can't see. And that's a very good way if you're running short of memory, or you're finding that maybe your renders are taking a bit longer. By all means, turn on dynamic population. Now, a word of warning though, if you do use dynamic population, don't use it if you're animating your camera. Because you'll find what will happen is, if you're animating your camera, as the camera moves, view is going to start popping in and popping out whatever that dynamic object is, in this case grass, into your field of view. So you're going to render out your animation and you're going to see grass popping in and popping out on the sides of the camera's field of view if you have dynamic population turned on. So by all means, use dynamic population if you want to reduce your memory footprint for your computer and also speed up your render slightly. But don't use it if you're animating your camera, okay? I generally don't use it either way. I prefer to have, because I'm working on a small scene here, I don't need to use dynamic population anyway. It's really useful if you're creating a really large scene with the mountains and all that type of thing, and you want to put grass and trees into the field of view. By all means, if you're rendering out stills, use it. It's very useful. But if you're animating the camera, don't use it. Turn it off. Okay, I just wanted to point that out again because people can get a bit confused as to what that means and when you should use it and when you shouldn't use it. Don't use it if you're animating the camera, ever. Because you'll wait days for your animation to render out to see that when you play back the animation, you've got objects popping in and out all the time. So no dynamic population on your ecosystem if you're animating the camera. If you're just doing a still image, then it's fine to use it. And like I said, we could use it here, but I generally don't use it, period. So that's the dynamic population in view. Now, so we've put our leaves along the path here. We've got them spread up the stairs. We've got our bunches of flowers on either side. I think the next thing we're going to be doing now is to bring in two small hills that I want to place on either side of our terrain here. So on this side and this side that we're going to be placing our hero trees on. So I think what we'll do is we'll load those up and get them placed. They're not going to be textured or anything. They're just basic shapes that I've created. And you'll see what they are. All they are is I added a terrain. I shrunk it down. I added a couple of rocks. You've got your rock editor here. You just load up a rock that way or play around with them. It comes with a few different varieties of rocks. So all I've done is I've created a terrain. It's not textured. Has no ecosystem or anything on it. I've loaded in a couple of rocks and I've just arranged them the way I want them. That's what you're going to be seeing now when I load them in. Before I load them in though, I do want to create a new layer for them. Let's call this foreground. Foreground mounds, because that's all they really are. They're just going to be small mounds of for our trees to sit on. So I have my mound layer selected. I'm going to load in an object. So this is one here. This is the left mound. Let's start with I want to start with the right mound. You can see in the image there, all it is a terrain with a couple of rocks on it, and the terrain has no texture assigned to it at all. We'll pull that in. Just going to wait for it to load it in. Again, remember guys, if you're watching and you have a question for me, please feel free to pop into chat and ask me. If there's something I'm doing that you don't quite understand, again, feel free to pop into chat and ask me. I'm here to help you guys as much as I can. I'm not here just to work on my own thing. I want to help you as much as I can, if I can. I don't know everything, but if I have an answer, I'm quite willing to help you. Okay, so this is our terrain, and all it is really is, like I said, it's a small terrain object I've added, and then I've just thrown a couple of rocks around it. Now I'm just going to move this into the position I wanted here on the left hand side. Make sure I've got it down, sunk into the terrain, the grass terrain. Again, we're going to have to sort of eyeball this to to get an idea of how far down we should sink it. I deselect it. Okay, now I know I want to move it over slightly. Again, I'm looking in my camera viewport here, but I'm moving my object in my top viewport. So I'm moving it up here, but I'm looking down here while I move it to get the correct position. And again, I'm going to sink it into the ground a bit more. Let's have a look at that. Okay. Let's pull in the right terrain now. The left-hand side terrain, I mean. Going to my left and my right. This one here. Again, it's the same thing. It's just a terrain with a couple of rocks on it. Untextured. The terrain is not textured. We're going to have to add an ecosystem to it and do all that sort of stuff. And these are going to be the two small hill sections that we're going to place our hero trees on, so that's the reason we're pulling them in and using them. We could have set the trees directly on the grass here, but I wanted to add a bit more visual interest in that. So by adding two smaller terrains that we're putting on top, again, it's just going to add more interest in the scene. But by all means, you could have put the trees directly in the grass. This is just a more interesting way to do it. Okay, and there it is. I'm just going to move that one to the other side. And these are scaled correctly already. I'm going to lift it up because it's a bit too far into the ground. Again, I'm looking in my camera viewport here while I move it in my top viewport. And you see how I've staggered this? I have this one further back and this one further toward the camera. Again, that's to add that definition of layers that I was talking about in this scene. Don't go for a flat sort of rendering. Don't put everything on one plane. Try and move things closer to the camera to add more depth to the render. Let's deselect it. I'm going to pull it further down into the ground. It's a bit too high. It's still a bit too high. I may pull it down just a little bit more. Okay, now again, I'm not going to know for certain what this is going to look like until we do a preview render. Before we do our preview render though, I want to save the file, and that's going to take about 5 minutes, so I'm going to... Hey Alchemist, how are you? It's good to see you. Oh, I didn't notice you in chat there before. We're just working on our environment here for our garden terrace. We've just scattered some leaves along the path, and now we're putting in some hills here, some mounds for hero trees we're going to be putting in. But yeah, what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm going to save the file and take a quick break. I will be back in just a few minutes. I'm going to grab a fresh cup of coffee. While I'm doing that, I'll save the file because, you know what, me, I'm a big believer in saving regularly. View can take a little longer than, say, Max or whatever other 3D software you're working in, just because it has so much to save out. Because remember, we're working in over 1 billion polygons. We're getting up to nearly 1.5 billion polys at the moment, so there's a lot for the program to save. So while it does that, I'll take a break and grab a fresh cup of coffee. And I'll be back in just a few minutes, guys, so hang around. I'll leave you with my Be Right Back screen. Let me know if the audio stutters like it did yesterday. I did make a change, so hopefully it fixed it. We'll find out. So I'm going to save my file, and I'll be back in just a few minutes, guys. Okay, it's still saving the file out. It's nearly done though. I know you can't see it because it's behind me. It's at about 60% at the moment, so let's wait a minute or so and it should be finished. Yeah, it's good to see you, Alchemist. Thanks for popping into chat and saying hi. So we've added our two terrains here on either side, small terrains with some rocks. Again, these are what we're going to be using to place the hero trees on. So we're going to have one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side. Now, we're only rendering out this square image, so a lot of the trees are probably going to be outside of our image, but what I'll end up doing is, once we're finished setting up our scene the way we want it, and rendering out our square image here, and doing our close-up square image of the model, I'll then do a render that's maybe 2560 by 1440, so we have a wider view, and the full trees will come into view then. We'll do that again by creating, we'll wait till we do our two cameras, camera 1 here and camera 2, which is close-up square, and then I'll change my render settings here and render out one that's more of a typical monitor type view, and then we'll see much more of our trees. Just remember though, the reason I have to create these square images is because of cornucopia. It's one of the restrictions they place on anyone that puts models in their store, and they only want to see the model itself really. They don't really want to see much of the environment. So for anyone watching that might be curious as to why I'm using a square image, that's the reason. It's a restriction I have as a broker for cornucopia to sell my models, that the image has to be square. But I will do one which is more of a rectangular monitor shape once we've rendered out these two square images. Alright, let's was the Be Right Back music, guys? Did that stutter at all? Hopefully I moved it off of my main hard drive that View saves its files to, so hopefully it didn't stutter for you. But let me know if it did and I'll look at it again. Let's put an ecosystem on these small terrains, because at the moment they're just using the default blank material. And to do that, I'm going to choose the path terrain. I'm going to go down to the material. It sounded fine, Sniper Echo? Oh good, thanks for letting me know. Like I said, I moved the audio file off of the hard drive that I saved my view scenes to. I have a feeling that when it was saving the file, it was because it was writing to that hard drive and having to read from it as well, it was causing problems, so I'm glad to hear it fixed it. I'm going to select that inner path material here, which is the one that runs along the side of the path. I'm going to go down here and copy the material. Now I'm going to select my right hand mound. It's a grouped object, so I'm going to open it. Select the terrain, which is called Mound 3. I'm just going to paste that material in. View's asking me if I want to populate the ecosystem, and I do. I'm going to do the same thing here with the left mound, the one on this side, over here. Select the mound, not the rock. Paste the material and populate the ecosystem. And let's do a preview quality render again to see what our placement is like with it. I have a feeling this one may be a bit too far into the path, but I'll find out when we do a quick render. I may end up changing materials that are on the rocks as well, so we'll see how we go. We'll see what they look like. Because this is the first time I've actually moved those objects into this scene. So we're going to have to play with them a little bit. Basically all we did there with copying the material was we took the grass material that's along the sides of the path, the ecosystem, and we applied it to those two mounds. So the mounds themselves should be covered up with grass now. You don't have to do that. You could have added a different material, a different ecosystem if you wanted to. I just thought for consistency we might as well use the same grass material that grass ecosystem we used for the rest of the terrain there. Again, I've added the rocks just to give the image a bit more visual interest. I could have just used mounds on their own without rocks, but having the rocks in the image is a good contrast to the grass, and it will just help add a bit more interest in the render, as well as add a bit more height toward the front of the camera, closer to the camera there. Add a bit more height from the actual ground plane itself, the grassy plane itself. I was worried that this terrain here was too far into the path, but I'm looking at it here and it looks okay. What I'm going to do once it's finished doing its preview render, I'm going to jump back to the last render we did. I want to check that it's not covering up too much of the leaves though. Again, that's a good use of views stack here. It allows you to jump back to previous renders you've done and compare. It does that automatically every time you finish a render. It pops it down here in the stack. There is a trash can if you don't want it. You just hit the trash can to delete it. But it is helpful because, like I said, it allows you to jump back to previous renders and do a comparison quickly. Max has a similar function built into its renderer where you can slide. There's a slider in the renderer, but you can slide between two. V-Ray has it as well, between two renders to do a comparison. View takes it just a little bit further and allows you to jump all the way back to the very beginning through the renders. And again, guys, remember this is a very low quality preview render, so don't judge necessarily the image on what you're seeing at the moment because it is just a preview quality render. And we haven't made adjustments to the lighting. And even when we do our final quality render, as I've been telling you guys, we're going to be taking the images into Photoshop and doing color correction on them. I think what I'm going to end up doing as well is these rocks that are in the foreground here on this side and on this side, I'm going to add an ecosystem to simulate moss. I think that's what we'll do once this render finishes. I'll show you guys how that's done. Again, for anyone new watching, remember that Eon View this has a free version of the software you can download called the Personal Learning Edition PLE. Go to Eon View's website and download it if you want to try it out. I encourage you all to do that because, like I said, that's why I'm on Twitch. I'm here to to encourage you guys to do 3D and show you my workflow that I use to create images. So the best thing you can do is to download the software, install it because it's free. It does have some restrictions, but it's free. You can certainly try it out. It has all functionality that I'm using. And give it a go yourselves. Remember, you're not going to get better at something unless you keep practicing. Keep practicing at what you're doing. So just because you may not be good at 3D immediately doesn't mean you won't be if you keep playing with it and creating stuff. It just comes with time. It just takes a bit of time, that's all. Most of the problem with 3D and people have is just learning the interface. That's generally what the hurdle that most people find most difficult to get over is learning what buttons do what and how to do things. But you're not going to learn it unless you install it and try it out and play with it. And the more you play with it, the more you'll learn it. Alright. Now I'm just going to jump between these two to check our leaves there. That seems fine. The new terrains are not covering up any of the leaves we put on the path, which is really what I was concerned with. Yep, that's fine. Let's concentrate on these rocks here, I think. So let's start with the right hand side one. And this foreground rock. The one in the background over here, again, we're not really seeing it much, so I'm not going to play with that one at all, but let's look at this main rock here in the foreground. I'm going to double click on the material. I'm going to change it from a simple material to an ecosystem. That will keep our underlying material and add an ecosystem on top. Now I'm going to load in a plant. And I'm going to now these plants are the default ones that come with the program. So if you download the PLE and try out the software, these are the plants that you'll some of them that come with the software. I'm going to select. There's a specific plant I'm looking for. This one here. This small grass-filled plant too. This one will work really well for our ivy. If you want to, not ivy, for moss. If you want to put moss on tree trunks or on rocks like we're going to be doing here, go into your grass-filled plants button up here in the browser and load up small grass-filled plant 2. We'll just wait for View to pull that into the ecosystem. Now again, because we're assigning this plant to this rock that we have selected, it's only going to put it on that rock. It's not going to put it anywhere else in our scene. Now we do want to change the scale here. We're going to knock it back to 0.2. And let's just go populate. Now it's going to place the moss probably everywhere, which is not really what we want, but I'm going to go OK and deselect the rock so I can see it a bit better. Now I know it's hard to see, but those little green dots here and there, that's the moss, and it's way too thin at the moment. So let's jump back into our material, and overall density, let's pull that right up to about 94% and populate again. You can see the number of instances of that object is 34,465. Again, I know that sounds like a lot, but for View it's not a problem at all. Let's deselect it and have a look. Now you can see that that moss covering that rock now, it's a bit too much. So let's select the rock again. Double click it to open the material. Now there's an option here called variable density. Let's turn that on by putting a tick in that box. Double click this new sphere that's just opened up. And let's select this grainy fractal. Let's populate again. You see that's taken it back to 6,661 instances. Let's have a look at that. That's removed a lot of the moss that was covering the entire top of the rock and made it look a little bit more natural. So now that we've reduced our instances, let's jump back into our overall density and pull that right up to 100% and populate again. I don't suggest you pull it up to 100% until you put this variable density in, otherwise it's going to create a lot of pieces of moss. See, now we're up to 11,295. Now, let's copy that material that we've just created. And let's assign it to the rock in the foreground over on this side. Now, let's see, which rock is that? That's rock number 1. I'm just going to right click and paste that material in. I'm going to tell View to populate. Deselect it. Now with this one, I don't want it so much on the top, so let's play with that a bit more. Select rock 1 again, open up our material, and you have something called presence. Now presence is really to do with ecosystems. It has no function for bitmap textures or anything. And the presence allows you to position the ecosystem on the object that it's assigned to. I'm going to pull it back from the top, repopulate. What that's going to do is it's going to remove the moss from the top of the rock and leave it more along the bottom of the rock. I want moss on the top over this side, but I want the moss on this side to be a little bit different to this rock. And by changing our altitude range, pulling it down from 1 to, in this case, 0.29, it'll depend on the size of the object you're applying it to as to how much you have to pull it up or down. What that does is it moves the ecosystem, removes it from the top and only puts it more along the bottom. You have other constraints you can use like slope range or orientation. You can play with those depending on what the object is you're assigning an ecosystem to. Our altitude range should be all we need though for the rocks here. And you see that's removed it from the top and it's just put it along the sides here a bit more. Alright, well we've done that, so let's, you can probably get a bit better view on the top viewport here as to what it's done. You see it's covered the front rock here with a lot of moss. And so it's just put a little bit of moss here on our second rock, mainly along the sides. I'm not going to put moss on these 2 rocks because again, they're not going to be seen here in this render. Maybe when we do the larger render I'll do the same thing to those 2, but for now, there's no point in us adding an ecosystem there because remember, like I said to you guys, the more instances of objects you start adding, the slower your render is going to be. Whether or not it's in the field of view of the camera, it's still going to render it up. It's still going to slow down the render. So don't add unnecessary things outside of the camera's field of view if you can avoid it, just to speed your render time up as much as possible. I didn't mean to do that. What we might do is do another quick render of now that we've got the moss on the rocks and see what it looks like. Let's do that. And again, that's 0.2 for the size of that. The thing we're using for the moss is not really, was never created to be moss. It was created to be a small plant. But by reducing the size, the scale of that plant to make it really small, it creates really nice moss when it's used this way. Hopefully it is coming together, Sniper Echo. Like I said to you guys, you never really know what these scenes are going to look like until it's actually done.